What's going on YouTube? It is Texans Takeover here, back with another video. We're back. We're home from vacation. Um, Here at the free agency tracker, I'm gonna grade every single move the Texans made this offseason. Because it's been a couple of days of free agency now. It started on the 9th. It is now the 11th, and then this video is gonna come out on the morning of the 12th. So, hopefully you'll enjoy this. I'm back. There's going to be daily videos and stuff like that now. And if we do hit 500 subs, I am going to start live streaming. So if that's something you want to see me do, please consider subscribing down below. It means a lot to me. And I'm excited to interact with y'all live instead of through video and some comments. But start out with Titus Howard. I'm gonna give it a B minus. I think the money that he got, the Texans weren't going to pay, so I understand why we made the deal. I just think he's a very talented offensive lineman. I understand why we moved on from him, but I think he's very talented. So that's why I'm a little bit skeptical of it. But I do think that the Texans made the right move considering who we brought in, and the amount of money that we brought those players in for. I understand why the Texans did it, so I'll bump it up to a B. Titus Howard leaving the Texans. I think it makes sense from a logistics standpoint why Caserio moved on from Titus Howard. I think he understands it. I think the organization knew it was best to move on from him. So I think everyone's just moving forward with their heads up. And Titus Howard gets a brand new offensive line in Cleveland to play alongside. And we'll see who he ends up blocking for, whether it's Shedeur Sanders, Deshaun Watson, or maybe Ty Simpson. We don't know. That's yet to be seen, but we will see it in the future. These are deals that we already know happened. Juice Scruggs for Dave Montgomery. Dave Montgomery's an A+ all day of the week. You get your bell cow back for something that's not that expensive, in my opinion. I know it seems like a lot when you put Juice Scruggs pick 128 and a 7th round pick from next year, but it's a 7th round pick from next year in Juice Scruggs. At the end of the day, when you take it all in, Juice Scruggs is probably a cut candidate, and then a 2027 7th, you could probably pick up someone off the waiver wires and trade him for a 7th round pick for a team that wants him. So not that much there. I really think it's just a 4th round pick for Dave Montgomery, and I'm putting that in an A+ all day of the week. It comes right after the Titus Howard deal. We pick up 139, we give up 128. So we trade away Titus Howard, we get Dave Montgomery, move down 11 spots is the way to think about it. And the others are just throwaways that don't really matter. So Dave Montgomery's an A+. He's going to be a bell cow back. He was officially announced today. Which is something you can check over at the Texans Twitter if you do have a Twitter. And if you do have a Twitter, go follow me at Texans_takeover. Guess it's time to plug it. And actually, with this site, you can see David Montgomery here. If you click his name, it'll pull up, the report, and you can see it shows that the Lions are trading David Montgomery to the Texans. But that's just cool. Another feature about this, and then there's going to be some things added in the future to the cap calculator that I think will be interesting for y'all. But again, go follow me at Texans_takeover if you want to see all my in-depth thoughts and opinions there. But returning over to the free agency tracker, Jimmy Ward, I'm gonna give an A, I guess. He's not going to play for us. He never was going to play for us again. You free up that cap space. I think it's just an easy A. Doesn't really matter. Doesn't free up too much, but I think, not having him around or tied with the organization. So if those legal reports do come out, you're not really tied with him. You did the right thing in cutting him. I think it's a positive outlook on the organization. I know Jimmy Ward was a good player when uh, he was a bit younger and, had more to give, but I think he's a little past it now, and I think it's time for him to probably hang up the boots, or hang up the cleats, whatever you want to call them. But good player in his day, but it's just not there anymore. So I understand why the Texans released him, especially with all the trouble that he's in. Jamarcus Ingram's a B+, just a special teams guy that I think is going to make the 53-man roster, and I'm excited to see him compete over there in training camp. Trent Brown, A-. You bring in a backup offensive tackle for not too much money, 5.5 million base with only 1.75 million guaranteed. I think is very smart. Um, you're basically telling him he has to stay healthy or else he's not going to get paid that much, which I think he will stay healthy next season, especially playing that backup 6th offensive lineman role. We don't know what Blake Fisher's going to do anymore, but hopefully him learning from the likes of a Trent Brown and a guy that I'm talking about later in this video will help his development. But Trent Brown's a good offensive lineman backup. He can play left tackle, he can play right tackle, and then he's also, another player coach out there for Cole Popovich to utilize to help teach the younger guys. So I understand why the Texans did it. It's, an easy B+, probably an A minus for the re-signing of Trent Brown. You can see the guys that the Texans had. They have the re-sign tag, and then the ones that we don't are going to have live free agency. Stingley restructure doesn't mean much, nor does the Jalen Petries in terms of giving a grade because it's just embedded in the contract. The Neil Hunter extension, easy A plus. You free up $50 million in cap space, and you secure one of your most important players on the roster for another year. A plus all day of the week. I've talked about this enough, so we'll just move on from the Neil Hunter to the Joe Mixon, where it hurts, but it's an A. You free up $8 million in cap space by cutting Joe Mixon. You're probably going to find that same production from Joe Mixon and Dave Montgomery next year. I'm a firm believer that Dave Montgomery is a very, very good player. I think he was just underutilized in Detroit this past year, but when he was utilized, he was a very good player. Joe Mixon, I don't know if he's ever going to play a snap of football again, so there's that. So that release with the physical designation or failed physical designation makes a lot of sense for Joe Mixon. Frees up $8 million in cap space for the Texans to go attacking free agency, and then Dalton Schultz frees up another $5 million in there. So it makes a lot of sense to me. I'll give it an A minus because Isaiah likely got more money than Dalton Schultz is getting paid next year. So I think it was good value on the Texans end to resign him early before free agency started, so there wasn't, a big market reset where Dalton Schultz is asking for more money, and I'm pleased that we got him for that figure. We'll see what the guaranteed money is and stuff like that, but 1 year, $12.6 million in total for Dalton Schultz, I think makes a lot of sense. MJ Stewart resigns A minus. I think he's a really, really good backup who understands the scheme, and I think if a guy that we're talking about later in this video goes down with injury, or Kalen Bullock goes down with injury, he can step in both of those roles and be a pretty impactful player. So I understand it. Makes a lot of sense to me. Not a lot of money given to MJ Stewart either. I'm glad he signed for that cheap of a deal. So A minus for me, easy. And then we re-signed EJ Speed for 2 years, $13 million, 7.5 guaranteed. So on the cap books, it's about like 375 per year in terms of cap hit. So makes a lot of sense for the Texans. Doesn't require much money in terms of the cap space. If he plays all year, then that's a different story. But at the same time, it's not like the cap hit's going up in free agency for him playing because you can't play a game in free agency. So EJ Speed signing makes a lot of sense for me. Really good special teamer, really good third linebacker for us. Apparently, we're looking at another linebacker in free agency, but for me, EJ Speed's a B plus. Just because I like some of the younger linebacker options in the open market, like a Micah McFadden or a Malcolm Rodriguez. I thought the Texans could look at, but EJ Speed's a really good player. Don't get me wrong. I'm pretty pleased that he's headed back to Houston. I thought there was just some younger guys that you could maybe look at, but not mad at it at all. Naquan Jones comes back for only $2 million a year. This is an A plus. Really good depth piece. I think another gem signing. Caserio found a gem in Tommy Togiai first, and I think he could have found another gem here in Naquan Jones, who seems really pumped to be back with Houston. I think he feels there's some unfinished business after only joining halfway through the year last year. And then ultimately crashing out in the divisional game. I think he understands there's unfinished business here. This team's going to, I think, has a higher ceiling this upcoming year than last year. And Naquan Jones certainly helps that. Resigning for $2 million a year, I think he's going to be on our 53-man roster, and I think he's going to be a really important rotational piece on the defensive line to be a run stuffer. So excited what a Naquan Jones with an entire offseason to understand the scheme and a training camp really does in terms of his development as a Houston Texan, because I think he's a really, really good player, and I'm excited to see what he does. So A plus, easy. Then the Texans signed Ed Ingram when I was gone. I think Naquan Jones came out when I was gone too, so there's that. But re-signed Ed Ingram for $12.5 million a year. It's got to be an A, in my opinion. I think he really suits what you want to do in terms of that downhill running. He's going to be a right guard heading next year. He's going to play the same role that he did last year. One of the better run blockers in the league, especially with that Nick Caley system. I think he has some work to do in terms of a pass blocker, but whatever veteran offensive guard we do bring in, I think could be very important to Ed Ingram's development as a player, and especially as a pass blocker. I think, if you can find someone who's a really good pass blocker like a Joel Bitonio, a Wyatt Teller, Kevin Zeitler, to come in and be a left guard for a year and develop a young guy that we draft, and then also Ed Ingram, I think it's going to pay dividends to, the ceiling and the floor of this team moving forward. But $12.5 million when Zion Johnson got like 16 a year. Elijah Vera Tucker got 14 a year. I think Ed Ingram's a better guard than both of those players. So you free him up before free agency even begins, and you see how much that really impacts you in terms of how much APY these other players are getting that are worse than Ed Ingram. I think Caserio pulled a mastermind here. It's 12 and a half a year, which is steep for a player, but not for Ed Ingram and how important he was to this offensive line last year and how young he is. He's only 26, maybe 27 now, but you know, only going to be 30 at the end of this contract for an offensive lineman that's not too old. So I completely understand it by Caserio. Then we re-signed Sheldon Rankins the same day, right before free agency began. 2 years, $12 million guaranteed. I think it's like 17 in total. So, about 7.5. I think this makes a lot of sense. You see the defensive line market. I think a lot of people are getting more money that are worse than Sheldon Rankins. Very similar to the Ed Ingram deal. If you notice, that's what Caserio is really trying to attack. And this is our last re-signing before free agency opened. This happened about an hour and a half, maybe before free agency opened. I'm not entirely sure on the time of it, but um, yeah, Sheldon Rankins a really good player. You can see how much some defensive linemen are getting for in free agency or getting traded around for, like an Osa Odigizua, got traded from the Cowboys to the 49ers for a third round pick, but he's also due to get paid $20 million a year. Sheldon Rankins at 7.5, and I think one of the most vital players on this defense in terms of his leadership and just how well he gets along with guys like Will Anderson Jr. Make a lot of sense. The organization loves him. I think he likes being in Houston. 2 years, $12 million guaranteed, which means it's $6 million APY for the cap hit. Makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad that Sheldon Rankins is back. I'll give it a B just because, or a B plus actually. I think it's very good value, but I think for his age, you could look for someone younger. But we did get someone younger, which is my favorite deal that we've done in free agency so far. To start out with in free agency, special teamer in Dominique Robinson. Um, on a 1 year deal worth up to $4 million. I'll give it a C plus, just because I think there's upside there. I think he still has development to do. Obviously shows some flashes. He has you know elite length, um, but elite in terms of a measurable. He doesn't utilize it to his full potential. Maybe learning from a Daniel Hunter, maybe learning from a Will Anderson will help bolster up his pass rush move, because I think he does have a lot of development to do. He played quarterback, then he played wide receiver, then he shifted over to defensive end. But really good special teams guy. Um, One of the bigger dudes on special teams that's going to be able to evade blockers and lay the boom sometimes. But yeah, C plus just because I think his role on the team is just going to be a backup. But I don't mind it at all if he shows that upside and that promise that he came into the league with and that potential. Then we move on to a pretty big one. This is Reed Blankenship signing from the Philadelphia Eagles to be our strong safety. I know some people said they don't really like how um, Reed Blankenship played last year, but he was playing as a single high. The Eagles were weird where Cooper DeJean was playing that nickel that Jalen Petrie plays, but then you didn't have a two high. You had a Reed Blankenship in a single high. Um, he's coming to Houston to complement off another safety who's elite in Kalen Bullock. 3 years, 24 million, 20. I'll say $25 million. This is an A minus for me. I think he really fits what the Texans do in terms of that swarm mentality. He's really good in the run game. And this means you don't really have to go out and get safety too high. If you want to go get a Bishop Fitzgerald down the board, you certainly could. And then you have a rotation of Fitzgerald and Jaden Reed behind Blankenship and Bullock, which makes a lot of sense. If one of those two go down, then you have a designated free safety, you have a designated strong safety. You develop those behind Blankenship, you develop those behind Bullock, and if they're priced out of a Blankenship when his contract's up, or they don't want to re-sign him, then Jaden Reed's right there, or Bishop Fitzgerald's right there. Makes a lot of sense, and really good job by Caserio by planning ahead, and you get a really good player in Blankenship. Um, I really like his game. I think if you put him in a two high instead of a single high, then he's going to be a lot better of a player than Philadelphia Eagles fans give him credit for last year. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm giving it an A minus, and probably one of our big deals, or well, was our big deal in free agency to begin with. And certainly one of my favorites so far because I really like the way he plays. Then we extended Kaimi Fairbairn. He got $6.5 million to be the highest paid kicker in the league. Not significantly higher than the guy below him, but frees up a couple $1 million in cap space. This is an A plus. Definitely deserves it with how many field goals he made last year. Basically, our whole offense was Kaimi Fairbairn last year. So Gets rewarded, makes a lot of sense to me. Not going to speak too much on it. Reward the leg. He's been good for you. He's been consistent for you. He's been a model professional for you. Continue to reward that until he wants to retire. It's a kicker. It's not like anything's really going to give away. He has an incredible kick range. He has incredible kick accuracy, and he was incredibly clutch last year. So ticked all three of those boxes. He gets an extension. He becomes the highest paid kicker in the league. Probably not for long because Brandon Aubrey is a free agent, but glad to see that we, gave Kaimi some assurances that he's our guy moving forward at that kicker position. Then we move into a big one. Fairbairn's an A plus for me, excuse me. But Braden Smith, 2-year, $20 million deal, up to $25 million potentially with $13.5 million guaranteed via free agency. There are some reports that he could potentially play guard. That's not true. He said that he never even spoke to the Texans about it. He's going to play right tackle for us. So Braden Smith is going to be our starting right tackle next year. And then Trent Brown's going to be our backup offensive tackle next year at either right tackle or left tackle. So any speculation that he's going to play guard is going to go out the window. 2 years, $20 million, $10 million APY for Braden Smith, $13.5 million guaranteed, which takes that a little bit lower. Makes so much sense. Has some health concerns in there, but when he's not healthy, Trent Brown's going to be healthy, and then if Trent Brown's not healthy, Braden Smith's healthy. So you have a good rotation of right tackles there. Has a really high ceiling. Seems like he's getting back to his best football after having some mental issues. And some injuries in there. I think he's a really good player when he's able to play up to his ceiling. Has a lot of room left, or has a lot of gas left in the tank, excuse me. And I really like him as a player. I think the Texans are going to do great things with Braden Smith, and I think he's going to be a plug and play right tackle starting for the entire season as long as he's healthy. He's going to be one of the first offensive linemen on that starting lineup, and I'm glad the Texans brought him in. Really needed some offensive line assurances there, and I think Braden Smith definitely does that. He provides versatility to step in at guard if we really have a void, but I really don't think he will. I think he's going to be a right tackle for sure, and I don't think he's ever going to change from a right tackle after it's voted him so well and got him so much money in the NFL. So Braden Smith's an A plus for me. One of my favorite fits of offensive lineman. If you looked at that video, if you watched that video, Braden Smith was a part of that list. So I'm really glad the Texans did bring him in. And then we move up to Jake Hummel, which happened like the same exact time as Braden Smith. I think we got Smith done and then Hummel done within 5 minutes. Special teams guys, same with Dominique Robinson. I'm just going to give it a C plus. Going to be probably LB5, LB6, but one of the better special teams guys on this roster. So it makes a lot of sense to me. Not that much money given up for Jake Hummel. Not too much guaranteed, at least. 2.5 or $2.15 million guaranteed. So about 1.7 or 1.07 a year in terms of guaranteed money. Not too much. Going to be a special teams guy, probably one of the better special teams guys in the league. So glad the Texans brought him in. So I'll actually give it a B, just because you're allocating your money well, because special teams is a very important facet of the game. Then you move up. We traded for Kai Kroger. Yeah, this one was interesting. Tommy Townsend is now a Titan, but you acquire a lefty punter. I'll give it a C, just because he didn't show that promise that he showed at South Carolina at New Orleans last year, and I know a lot of Saints fans were glad that they moved on from him. I think he definitely has a high ceiling as a punter. He showed that in the SEC. Didn't show it in his rookie year, but um, lefty punter is definitely giving you an advantage. And we have a lot better of a special teams unit than the New Orleans Saints do, and I think that's pretty obvious and evident. Um, when you watch the Texans, one thing you notice is how well their special teams is coached. Thanks to Frank Ross. So I think Kai Kroger, maybe with an extra second in there, does have a booming leg. So if he gets hold of a couple, he's gonna be able to switch the field for you. Um, so not the end all be all, but I would like another punter in there for some competition, just because Kroger didn't necessarily show that promise in his first year in the league. So yeah, I'll give it a C. Probably my lowest graded move this entire free agency. But we move up to my favorite one. This is an A plus in Logan Hall. I predicted this for weeks. The U of H kid that went number 33 overall to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers now finds himself back in Houston, with the Houston Texans. 2-year deal worth about $14 million in total, $9 million guaranteed, so about 4.5 a year in terms of guaranteed money. But has a very high ceiling, about 6'6", 280. He's able to play on the interior. He's able to play on the exterior. Basically, a younger, bendier, um, better version of what Danico Autry was for us last year, which had a very vital role for the team in terms of pass rush downs, in terms of even when guys were hurt, being able to step into both roles. So, yeah, really excited for Logan Hall. If you saw my free agency track or free agency simulator videos, Logan Hall was a pretty consistent pickup for me, um, just because I really like the idea. Um, of his ceiling, how young he is, how much development he has left, and the idea of putting him in this defensive line with Will Anderson Jr. and Daniil Hunter. So, really pleased that this did happen. This is an A plus for me all day of the week. So, yeah, really, really pleased with this signing. And I think March 10th was probably our biggest day in terms of free agency. Today, we released Mario Edwards Jr. This is going to be an A minus for me, just because I thought he was very good as a Texan. It makes a lot of sense why we did it. Frees up $4.5 million in cap space, and was hurt the entirety of last year. So, again, I completely understand why the Texans did it. If he was a bad player for us, this is an A plus all day of the week. No questions or thoughts about it. But just because he was a good player for us when he was healthy, especially in the early part of that season on the interior defensive line with Tim Settle, um, it does sting a little bit just because you know how good that defensive line could have been if those two guys were able to stay healthy. Shame that they weren't, but I understand why the Texans released him, frees up um, a good amount in cap space for us to go reinvest, and that we did with a new blocking tight end in Foster Moreau. This is an A minus for me. This is going to be a guy that steps in, really good pass blocker, able to block in the run game as well at that tight end position. So maybe we see the end of a Cade Stover. Maybe we see the end of a Brevin Jordan. We don't really know. Doesn't seem like Harrison Bryant's going to be coming back, though. So maybe Foster Moreau's that replacement. And then, people just shift down the depth chart a little bit. You raise your floor a lot with Foster Moreau. Really good security blanket, good hands. And you're paying him about 3.15 a year, at least, and then I think it could get up to like 3.6, 3.7 a year, um, if he's able to get to in his incentives. So, makes a lot of sense for me. Really good backup tight end there for the Texans in terms of a blocking tight end. So, I completely understand why we did it. I don't know what grade I said originally, but if I said A minus, I'm going A minus for Foster Moreau. Um, but yeah, that wraps up everything Caserio's done. 26 moves made in total this offseason so far. Some of them are, uh, trading a sixth round pick and trading Juice Scruggs in that for Dave Montgomery. But um, so it's 24 in total if you want to combine Kroger and then the Montgomery deal too. 24 in total made, but 26 separations in terms of trade outs and trade acquisitions. In total, I'm giving Caserio a B plus to an A minus. We'll see what we do tomorrow. We'll see what we do the rest of free agency. I think this has the potential to be an A minus and A. We've done a lot of good stuff this free agency, really attacking our identity in terms of wanting to be a team that swarms, and I think we're doing that offensively too, which I really like. Finally getting into that identity. So yeah, I'll go B plus for now, but I think one decent move moves it to an A minus. Even if that moves a B minus, I think it moves the team up to an A minus just because I think free agency has gone really well so far. And I think Caserio is finally addressing the identity of this team, which has been something that I've wanted him to do for a while. So I'm pleased that he is doing this. Um, but yeah, that is everything. Let me know y'all's thoughts down in the comment section below. If you like this free agency, if you haven't liked this free agency, let me know what y'all think. Give me a grade down below. A through F. You can give an A plus and all that stuff too. F minus if you really want to. I know there's not really that much range with an F. If you fail, you fail. But A plus, D minus would probably be the next letter before an F. So yeah, let me know what y'all think. Go check out HoustonStressins.com/FA or the cap calculator or the draft tracker. Not really any new news in terms of top 30 visits. So if you've seen the Caden Proctor top 30 visit, then that's all that's been updated just because there hasn't been any news. But as soon as that does happen, I'll be sure to update that. But yeah, if you did enjoy this video, please be sure to like, subscribe. Again, once I hit 500 subscribers, live streams will begin. So if you do want to see me live stream, then please consider hitting that subscribe button. And as always, it's Texans Takeover, and I'm out. Thanks again for watching. Peace.